Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe, your friendly neighborhood Canadian-Australian leadership expert. And I guess I'm wondering, have you ever found yourself as a leader getting in the way of your team's performance? Like you're the bottleneck and you're just an obstacle for people getting on and doing stuff. Or that people always have to default to you to ask questions to get stuff done. It can be exhausting. And maybe you've had the epiphany of like, this can't go on. Well, let me tell you about our guest today because he is an entrepreneur, a father of 3, and an aspiring racing driver. I love that story. He bootstrapped his first business, International Key Supply, as a side gig from his basement apartment. And he built it to a 10-figure business with over 40 employees and became a leader in its space. You know, it kind of fell in his lap and he chased it and did really quite well. And then he went through 2 mergers with the company. He has since left IKS, International Key Supply, to spend more time with his family. And he now has a new gig that he started up. It's called Huey.io, which is an interactive organizational chart app that integrates with Slack and is built to keep every employee in the company better informed and who's who at the zoo. So we have a delightful conversation about the ups and downs of his career, his insights as a leader. Oh, his name. I should tell you his name. His name is Sean McAuliffe, and he's a delight. Let's get on with the show. Hey, well, all the way from fantastic Long Island, welcome to the show, Sean McAuliffe.
Hey, Zoe, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here and chat with you tonight.
I feel like I love talking to Americans who live just around the corner from my sister who lives in New Jersey because I feel a little bit closer to that side of my family who is on the other side of the planet. And you've had such an interesting career. I'm also really thrilled to talk to you about the ups and downs of what you've done as an entrepreneur and worker. And just before we hit record, you were telling me a hilarious story about one of your businesses where you were a locksmith supply person. It was a locksmith supply business. Can you tell us a little bit about how the hell you ended up doing that and also where you are now and how you joined the dots in between?
Sure. Yeah, actually, really just fell into it. I was working as a sales rep in the car audio industry, B2B. So I was selling car stereos, alarms, remote starts, things like that to car stereo install shops. And a customer of mine asked me if I could get him keys. Because I had actually been calling. He wasn't even a customer, actually. He was someone I was trying to get to become a customer for like 2 years. And finally I was like, hey man, I've been calling you for like 2 years. We have a great conversation every time, but you never buy anything. What can I sell you? And he's like, I guess like if you could find me these keys, like I don't really like my supplier, so I'll get them from you. So I had been doing some sourcing in China for some of the companies I worked for, just getting creative. So I looked, what I could find these keys for in China. And then I actually searched around on eBay and saw they were selling for quite a bit higher than what the cost was in China. So from there, I just started doing it at home as a side gig, selling, I started with I think my first order was like $150, it was really, and that was a lot of money to me at the time.
Of car keys? Like $150 of car keys?
Yes. Yeah.
Like the clicky ones or like the keyless entry ones? Or
before even the clicky ones, I ended up getting into those, but it was just the car key itself. It has a computer chip inside, so it's not just a metal key, but that was it.
Yeah, right.
So I was selling them on eBay, and from there, I started with $150, then $200, $250, and just kept added another type of key. And eventually, I noticed that locksmiths were buying from me on eBay. And since I had the B2B sales experience, eventually I just started calling them up directly because at the time, eBay actually gave you the customer's phone numbers. They don't do that anymore. And from there, I started building some relationships, adding more products. Eventually, at one point I had a rack next to my desk that was like 3 feet high with like 9 boxes of keys on it. And then I had a second rack with like 9 boxes of keys on it. And then eventually it was getting out of control. So I rented subletted a little bit of space in an office somewhere. And just from there, just grew it to where we had 40 employees. We ended up merging with a couple companies. So we had 3 offices around the country, 5, maybe it was 8,000 SKUs in stock. So yeah, started with $150 in one SKU and then finished with, I think it was 8,000 SKUs on the shelf in the warehouse. It's pretty wild.
And a SKU is like an item code number thing, right?
Yeah.
So is that what that means?
Yeah. So basically in the beginning, I was selling one type of item. By the end, we had 8,000 items in the warehouse.
Yeah. That's just nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I think it's, I just love your audacity. Call up your customer who hasn't been a customer. You've been talking to him for 2 years and go, what can I sell you? I love that. It's so brazen. And it just...
He was bigger than us as a customer, and I had just been trying.
And what were you trying to sell him? Cars?
I was trying to sell him...
Or car security or something?
Yeah, remote starts, alarms. They were a remote start and alarm installer for car dealerships. So I was trying, and that's what we sold as a distributor. But they were like bigger than us as an installer than a distributor. So I was just trying to sell them anything I could at that point.
I love it. So yeah, okay. So the key business, right? And then you got rid of that. Well, you got rid of it. You merged. You did some interesting things there. We'll talk about the ramifications from a staffing point of view about that in just a moment. And then you've ended up in a completely different enterprise, which is online software, as far as I can tell. You know, this beautiful company. How do you pronounce its name?
Huey. Huey.io.
It's Huey, is it?
Yes.
Huey. Okay. What's the .io?
It was the domain I could get. So it's used on a lot of tech software. So yeah, it's the one I could get.
Right. Okay. So you're going from like car security system salesperson to selling keys and being a locksmith supplier specialist to now this Huey organization, which is organizational chart management and employee engagement platform. What led to this last iteration? Yeah,
definitely it's a change. During my time running the key business, we used a lot of software. We were very tech forward. And it was actually a bit of a antiquated business, and we helped drive it forward, I think. But anyway, I used a lot of software in my time there. A lot of it was great, a lot of it not so great. And I feel like I learned what makes software good and what doesn't. And also going through the merger, and a lot of good things came from it, but also definitely, especially from my side, being the original founder, there's frustrations and things kind of slow down, and then you don't know who does what and how to get a hold of people, the right people. So kind of just inspired me to try and solve that problem where, you end up spending an hour to find the person to do a 10-minute thing, as your team is growing rapidly and you have all these new people. So yeah, I thought I'd just give it a try and hopefully see if I can help some people and help some teams stay agile. Because that's what really frustrated me, was things slowed down during the merger, and we were always just churning. So
yeah, let's talk about the merger experience, right? So you were bought out, or was it like one company ate the other, or did you come together as like minds?
So it's actually very interesting. In December 2019, I merged with a company partially bought out, but this was a good merger, I'd say. It wasn't us just becoming this thing underneath them. We really worked together and kind of took the best of both sides. And then a year later, merged with another group and split from the original one. So through the pandemic year, one merger, then a split and a new merger, which was obviously a lot to do in the space of a year when the pandemic was going on. So yeah, there was 2 mergers there, both private equity backed, both pretty good experiences in terms of, there wasn't slashing and burning going on, and there was a lot of creative stuff going on, but still there's a lot of frustration that comes when that's going on.
Absolutely. So that's a lot of people change. What did you learn about leadership and people management through that process?
Communication is really critical a lot of people, the employees don't know until you tell them, right? And even after you tell them, they have a lot of questions. Man, they're probably afraid to ask them in a lot of cases. And it's easy to forget that you've known that this has been happening for months behind the scenes, and you've had time to process it and think through it and plan, but no one else has, right? Just the top leadership has. Whereas everybody else, it's fresh for them for the first 3 to 6 months afterwards. You've already been dealing with it for 3 to 6 months behind the scenes, right? Or longer. So that's one of the most important things, is really having open communication with everybody on the team, and giving as much information as possible, and really encouraging open conversations, candor, and just trying to put everybody at rest, because it's nerve-wracking, and there's a lot of nervousness there that they're unwilling to share a lot of the time unless you kind of pry it from them, I think.
Absolutely. I like to think of it, when you have a merger like that, it's like throwing new chickens into an old chicken pen. And I used to have chickens. They've all passed away now. But when we had 3 old chooks, and then we brought in 3 new chooks, and they kind of had a big, massive standoff at the end of the one end of the pen. They kind of huddled in their little mini subgroups and looked at each other, eyeballed it, until they worked out they could actually get along okay. But, they lived together for, 5 years or whatever before they started dying off. And in those 5 years, like, they would hang out together okay, but always it was the older ones in one sleeping area and the younger ones in another one. And I'm guessing that was similar in terms of the merger. You kind of just hover there in your corner, looking at, eyeballing the other people, going, who are you? What are you about? And, are you going to steal my food?
Yeah, definitely. And it was during the pandemic, so we couldn't even really get together. Our teams were in different geographic locations spread around the country, so we couldn't really get together. We could for the first couple months, but most of the team couldn't. So that probably didn't make things any easier. But thankfully we had Slack and we had Zoom and all those things, and we were pretty active with that. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of that, and that's where the communication comes in to allay that hesitance and reticence of working together, because you're wondering, who is this person? Are they going to replace me, or what's happening? So just being as open as possible, I think that's really the best policy. I think most people can sense when things are being not said to them, and that's not generally appreciated. So I would just stress, be open.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you talk about and mention in the correspondence that we've had is about the ability to scale and the role of management in doing that. In fact, you say how you can remove yourself as a manager that actually helps the business scale. What do you mean by that? Like, I would have thought that if you're scaling your business, you probably need more management in order to streamline it. So how did you decide that it was better to remove yourself as a manager?
This was something that took me a long time to learn, and I'm still working on. But in the beginning, it was me, just me doing everything. Then it was me and 2 other people, then 5 other people, and 10 other people. And as the founder, the president, the entrepreneur, whatever, you have this vision in your head, and you feel like you need to make sure, or at least I did, that everything happens a certain way to get to this destination, which is always a moving target anyway. And in the beginning, you can do that and still be effective because you've only got a few people. So yeah, you're still working your butt off, but it's doable, right? But once you really start to scale and you've got 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 or more people, eventually you become the bottleneck in everything. And everyone else is afraid to make decisions because they think that you have to make the decision. So they don't make the decision. So then they don't make the decision for something. They can't get a hold of you because you're busy. Things don't happen. And everybody's stressed out at that point. So what I figured out after reading books and just thinking through and all these things is to really trust the people that I hired to get to the destination with their own path. I had to accept that they're not going to take my path to get there. And I can't force them to take my path to get there because they're not going to want to take my path. They want to take their own path. And I just have to trust that I hired the right person that can get to the destination that we're heading towards. And it's hard because, at least in my case, I would have employees who had a manager still come up to me and ask me questions of what they should do. And it's really easy at that time to tell them what to do and just say, oh, just do this. But that might be different than what their manager told them or said to them or would say to them. So I would just basically repeat this phrase all the time was, go ask your manager because I'm going to end up telling you the wrong thing. So I would just send them away to go talk to their manager just to get me out of the loop, and also not to subvert the manager I hired to manage that person. So, but it's really easy to just answer the question, but it's not the right thing to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because you're the font of all knowledge and your word goes anyway because you're the founder and the boss.
Right.
But it's a fast way to upset everybody around you, as you say, like undermine your managers. And then you create this false dependency, which isn't very helpful at all. Yeah. Okay, cool. So let me ask this question here. How do you, like, it's one thing to say, oh, I got to trust my managers and I've done the right hire. Like a lot of leaders struggle with the trust thing. And because they don't know the capability of the people around them. Trust is not something that you just willy-nilly hand over. Like there's got to be some structures in place to help you feel confident in the people around you. How did you go about taking the trust piece out of it? Like you say, oh, you just got to trust the people, but you talked about hiring people well and allowing them to do their own path. If we dig underneath this idea of trust, like what is it for you that makes it possible for you to let go and for the other people to step up? Had you thought about the recipe for that by any chance?
I hadn't really thought of a recipe. It was really just a conscious decision that I made one day that I'm just going to trust that this person understands, you communicate the destination, maybe some things you'd like to see in between, and watch as time goes to make sure, if you have to do some course corrections, of course you do that. But I don't want to micromanage you. You don't want me to micromanage you, right? And maybe you're going to come up with this great thing that I never would have thought of, which happened plenty of times if I was sitting there controlling everything. So it was really just a conscious decision where I was getting so stressed out and I was just, I realized like I just can't do it like this anymore. I'm just going to trust these people. I hired them out of a group of however many applicants. I've now, spent some time with them. We'll connect on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to make sure we're still, heading in the right direction. And that's really it. I mean, I think that also allows the people to make mistakes, but grow through those mistakes. That was the other thing that was hard to get over, was allowing mistakes to happen. Because yes, mistakes take time, but they're also necessary. You're not going to grow without mistakes along the way. It's just not going to happen.
And that's a really interesting point that you make.
My business would be better if my people made mistakes and grew through them.
And you're right. It is really hard to go, oh my God, because mistakes have a cost to them and it's not just time. So did you put some parameters around what kinds of mistakes were kind of allowable as lessons?
Not really. My thing was just say like, all right, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Right. We never had something that was a catastrophe, an absolute catastrophe. Obviously, we're still here, but yeah, it was more like, okay, this happened. What do we do to make sure it never happens again? And usually everyone was appreciative that they didn't get, dumped on for making a mistake. And from there, we all learned a valuable lesson, and now we move on and grow from it.
I love it. It's sort of like you have to take a real 2 pills, the humility pill of not being the font of all knowledge, and then the chill pill.
Yes.
Not freaking out over stuff.
Yeah. You might have a minor freak out for a minute in your head, but
which one of those was harder for you?
Probably the
minor freak out. It's like put on the game face.
Yeah. Probably just the initial, like, I'm gonna trust these people just to, you know, to do it. And I'm gonna take myself out of the process as much as possible. To the point where I would say, don't ask me because I'm gonna give an opinion and then it's gonna throw everything off. I'd rather you just do it and then come back to me.
It sounds like that was a smart move. Your business has been going for a while, and you talk about being able to achieve long-term employee retention, which also is one of the big concerns that many leaders have, is that they don't want to lose their teams. And especially now with all the big conversation about the mass resignations happening across the US, and they're foretelling it in Australia, though it hasn't necessarily happened at the same rate or scale just yet. How do you manage to achieve long-term employee retention where people stick around?
We didn't have a specific plan of action, and we didn't try specifically. Of course, we wanted everybody to be happy and enjoy working at the company. I don't want anyone to have to dread coming into work to the place that I'm running. That's not fun for anybody. But we didn't have specific action plans or programs, but it was more just being friendly, being understanding, and trying to have fun at work. That was really the biggest thing. And we were flexible. We had a warehouse, so we had 20 some odd warehouse staff, and usually that's a pretty high turnover role. But we had a lot of part-timers that we worked around their schedule, a lot of moms who worked around when their kids were at school. And we just made it work. We played with the puzzle pieces when we had to. If someone's schedule changed, we'd find another person to fill in the gap and keep that other person working. And if we could send them home with work that they wanted to do, we would do that. So we just tried to keep everybody happy and just be nice. That was really, I think, the biggest thing was just, trying to value what everybody does and hope that they enjoy coming to work, or at least don't, dread coming to work.
I love it. I love it as one of your key tips. Just be nice. I mean, it's you can go pretty far on that one principle, Actually, your principles are really lovely so far. Just trust the people that they're going to do the right thing and the best ability and probably do it better. And then just be nice.
Yeah. It's easy to say. It's not always easy to do. I don't want to make it seem like it's super easy, but everybody will be a lot happier that way, I think.
Absolutely. So your business, the key operation business, was it was a distributor business, right?
Yeah, we had a B2B distribution was our largest channel, and then we also had e-commerce aspect to it.
Okay. And with that type of business, operational excellence is super important, and accountability is also super important. How did you go about improving or maintaining a culture of operational excellence and accountability?
For us, the biggest thing was always looking for minor improvements and showing the team. In the beginning, it was me, then it was my operations manager, always showing the team the little things we saw, for example, around the warehouse, explaining, hey, let's move this shelf where we keep these supplies from here at the end of the warehouse to here by the shipping area so that we're not taking 20 long trips a day back and forth. It's all right here. But not just doing it, explaining it, and also asking for their suggestions. Hey, what can we do to make it easier, faster, better to work here, right? What's going to make your job easier? If their job is easier, they'll get more done, they'll enjoy it more, and everything will be more efficient. So it's really just, working out in the open, getting back there, playing around with the warehouse frequently, and asking for their input on what can we do, and looking at our own input, getting back there ourselves, myself, or the operations manager, and shipping orders and doing all that, just to get through it and see, when you're disconnected from it up in the office, it's easy for things to sometimes kind of not always move in the right direction. And if you just get back there, give a little guidance. Hey, I'm noticing this. Is this an issue? Oh yeah, we've been dealing with this. All right. Tell me earlier. Let's fix it, right? What do we got to do to make it run as smooth as possible back here? So it was really just a lot of working together and trying to find easy solutions.
How did you go about building accountability in the team, though? That's also another holy grail that leaders are often trying to figure out. How do I make people accountable? How do I get them own up to their tasks and all that kind of stuff? How do you go about doing it?
That's definitely really hard, especially when you're a small business, because you can't spend a ton of time on systems. When you're 20 people building some amazing system, it sounds great, but things are changing so rapidly that the system has to change with it. And it's too much to upkeep the system versus, just going with the flow. But as we got bigger, it definitely became more of an issue. And that's where towards the last 2 years was tailoring goals around it a little bit, which I don't necessarily love, but there's a necessary piece there. I'd never want to dangle money as like a carrot and a stick, right? If it's just a carrot, that's all right. But if it's a stick also, that's not a great feeling. So it's something we definitely struggled with, especially we had outgrown our software system and going through the merger and then the pandemic, things got pushed back. Originally, the plan was, okay, get on new software for the warehouse immediately. But then the pandemic happened. So that was something we were always working towards, was a better system now that we were of a size that could really benefit and afford it. And I think it's something they're now implementing at this point. I'm no longer there, but they're actually implementing it now, finally. But yeah, I think at some point you do need to take that decision of spending the money on a system, getting the consultants in to help implement it, along with regular check-ins, one-on-ones between manager and direct reports, and incentives for performance.
How did you go with the incentives for performance? Did it create competitive behavior, or like negative competitive behavior, or positive competitive behavior?
Some people took it differently than others. Some people, it seemed like, were stressed out by it, even though it was purely an incentive. It wasn't going to affect their salary at all. And it was a new thing. Others really enjoyed it. So it was interesting to see that dynamic when we first introduced that of, hey, if we ship X amount of orders in a certain amount of time every day or X days out of the week, you'll get something extra. That stressed some people out, even though it was new money that they weren't going to have before, but other people thrived on it. So it's really a crapshoot with how people are going to respond. I think, if I was still there, I'd be trying to come up with a different program that can kind of have, or maybe a more flexible program. But again, at that point, we were limited by our system and our software, because our software could only give us so much information, so much data. And we were just waiting to make that upgrade, but the pandemic set it back. So that's where, when you get to that size where you need to make that investment in the software and the system to give you that data where you can do those better programs.
So many amazing things about your business. And one of the things I was really interested in hearing your perspective on, we've all been going through the pandemic. A lot of us have had to work remotely, and then we have people all over the place. And one of the things that you've talked about is having a growing distributed team. And since the theme on the podcast this quarter is hybrid teams, I'm wondering what secrets of success you have to share around how to do that well.
I wish I had more, because it is definitely a challenge. But I would say, one of the most important things is really keeping in touch on a personal level, which is easy to forget to do when you're alone in your home office and grinding away at work, and you got to call a coworker or Zoom a coworker, and you just get to talking about work immediately, whatever the issue at hand is, and not just chatting as colleagues and coworkers, would around the office. So that is something that I definitely fell into when we first made the switch to remote. I just got into crazy work mode where I was just, at the computer and not really socializing with the team, because it's harder to do. You have to go out of your way to do it on purpose, almost. So that's one thing I would definitely say is something that's important, is making sure that that's happening in the company and people feel like they work together and not alone. And then they have some people that they talk to every once in a while about other work things. Easier said than done. The other challenge here in the States, at least, is the time zones. We're an East Coast company. I had someone on the West Coast managing people on the East Coast. So that was a challenge. So there's just a lot. You have to think logistically about those things and how people structure their days to make sure they can be available when they need to, but also be around to work with the people they need to. And then the other thing that we started doing much more regularly in a structured way was one-on-one meetings, either on a weekly or biweekly, where you're strictly doing catch up and making sure the ship's still heading in the right direction together, essentially is what that is. So that was the biggest thing that we really implemented. Before that, we were all in an office, so we ended up talking and going through things all the time. We didn't really have structured catch-ups at that time. We're still a pretty small company. When we went remote, that became very necessary.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like, that the personal connection and communication is really the secret to managing all that, and also logistics. When people are asleep and awake, and that, living and working in Australia, I understand that really quite well, because a lot of the people we interview on the podcast, say, for example, like you, are on other sides of the planet, and juggling time zones is not always convenient or easy to remember sometimes. So, Sean, one of my last questions for you is about car racing. We'll take a screenshot before we get off the call, but you got on your background, I think that's Formula One in the background of your screen.
This is actually IndyCar, but with my old company's two logos that we Photoshopped onto the advertisement above the track.
Okay, awesome. So you say on your LinkedIn profile, you aspire to be a professional car race driver. Really? And how far along are you on that journey?
Yeah, it's been one of these ridiculous lifelong dreams that I've had for my entire life, since I was a little toddler, that never went away. And that I would tell people, even in my teens, that wanted to be a race car driver and do everything. Problem was, I had no money and no one in racing and no racetracks near me where I live. So it was really, things were looking pretty bleak there in terms of achieving that goal. But that was actually before I had a family and wife and kids. The thing that kept me going through tough times and what actually was driving me to want to start a business so that I could make more money was becoming a race car driver. So having that goal from being a little boy to now 37 years old, where I'm finally making big strides towards that. But that goal is, I think, what drove me to start my first business. I don't think I would have been as driven to do it if I didn't have that one guiding light to go after. So where I'm at right now is I've done a bunch of racing over the last 2 years, kind of at a lower level. And now this year, I'm going to be running a full series. It's still an amateur series, but it's kind of a step up. And hopefully next year I'll step up another rung. And then my goal is to win the 24 Hours of Daytona, very famous race here in the States and actually internationally. So yeah, I'm still going for it. It makes my wife crazy and everything, but she knows that it's an obsession of mine, so she deals with it.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, thank you for sharing that, because that's very unusual. I'm how does that fit into the big picture of being a professional car race driver and managing organizational structure, software, and coming from a key supply background? What the?
Yes. Yeah. There's no real connection there. But the good thing about racing, or in this respect, it's good, is that it's on the weekends. So I can still work during the week. Bad in that, I have to leave the family and every once in a while for the weekends. But it's a lifelong dream, so I got to keep doing it.
I love that. I love the fact that you've had this since you were a little toddler, and sort of as the North Star and guiding light for you to make your decisions, and incorporated all aspects of your life into that. That's fabulous.
Yeah, I do want to say that after I had a wife and kids, they became my first North Star, but this was still right. Yeah, it was close. It was so close.
Thank you. I think that's important to point out. Yeah, I didn't want to just tuck them in underneath the wing of the car. It's like the car got tucked under the wing of the family.
That's right.
Good point to make. Where can people find out more about you and your business?
Find me on LinkedIn, McAuliffe Sean, or Twitter _Sean McAuliffe. Or the website, of course, huey.io.
Huey, HUEY.io.
Correct.
Sean, thank you so much. This has been really fun finding out about your world and your journey, the fun ups and downs and weird shifts of it, and the really good practical insights you've had in terms of how to lead teams and distributed teams and how to scale and get yourself out of the way as a leader. I think that's a really important lesson. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I had a great time.
There were plenty of fun insights and lessons with that interview with Sean. I love, first of all, how he maintained his childhood dream, and it kind of was shining there always as a way to galvanize his energy and move forward. And then incorporated that dream in with a new dream with his family, which I think is really amazing. And it sort of kept him moving forward, both those things, his family and the business. I love his philosophy of just trust people, get yourself out of the way, and just be kind. And to be thinking about people from a very basic human connection point of view is one of the observations I made in terms of his business success. And the other entrepreneurial lesson, I guess, is obsessing with solving people's problems. I love that he called up his one of his customers or aspiring customers and said, "Hey, I've been talking to you for 2 years. What can I sell you?" And he solved a problem. And that led to an entire business, which grew and grew and grew. And then with his new business too, it's like that problem of how do you find out who's who at the zoo? We need an interactive application that we can search people and find out who's doing what, and you get answers in moments instead of taking an hour to find out who the right person is to ask. So lots of really interesting tactical, practical insights in this interview with Sean. If you enjoyed it, please share. Please forward it to your mates and say what you enjoyed about the show, or email me, zoe@zoerouth.com, and let me know what you enjoyed, or if you have someone to recommend to the podcast. So this quarter, our theme is hybrid team success. And next quarter, we're actually talking about holacracy, which is independent teams, how you can get your teams to work autonomously. So getting yourself out of the picture even more so. And if you're enjoying learning about leadership, maybe you consider joining Amplifiers, which is our advanced leadership training program for CEOs, managing directors, and senior executives. And there in Amplifiers, we really stretch our leadership abilities, our thinking, and try and see more so we can lead better. It's an accountability implementation group where you can get your deep thinking done and take action on the stuff that matters. So if that's for you and it sounds awesome, go to my website, zoerouth.com, ZOEROUTH.com. Click on programs. You'll find Amplifiers right there. I'd love to hear from you and find out what your huge aspirations are for the year and whether or not we can help you. I'm sure we can. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.